You were never supposed to be part of this company. Dad built it for me. Sign the transfer papers, or I will make sure you regret every single day you didn't." My brother said that to me on a Tuesday morning, standing in my parents' kitchen, while my mother poured coffee like he hadn't just threatened me over scrambled eggs. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She just kept pouring, and that silence told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. I want to tell you how we got there. Because 3 months before that morning, I still believed my family loved me. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 31 years old, I have a master's degree in forensic accounting, and I have spent the last 6 years building a career at a firm that investigates financial fraud. I find the numbers people hide. I find the signatures that don't match. I find the money that moved when no one was supposed to be watching. It is, in hindsight, almost funny that my family thought they could do this to me. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 2 years when my father had his first stroke. It was mild, the doctor said. A warning. My father was 64, still running the logistics company he had built from a single truck in 1987 into a regional operation with 42 employees. He had always been healthy, stubborn, and completely convinced that he would live forever. The stroke shook him. It shook all of us. Daniel held my hand in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours. He brought my mother coffee she didn't drink. He drove me home at 2 in the morning and sat with me while I cried in the dark. And the next morning he told me to take as much time as I needed. That is the kind of man I married. I want you to remember that, because later in this story, people will ask why I didn't call him sooner. The answer is that I did. I just didn't tell him everything right away, because I needed to be sure of what I was seeing before I brought him into it. When you work in fraud, you learn not to accuse before you have the proof in your hands. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one my father took to the warehouse on weekends, the one who learned to drive the forklifts at 15, the one who sat in on client meetings before he was old enough to shave. I never resented that. I loved numbers, not trucks. I went to college, got my degree, built my own career. My father used to brag about me at family dinners. He called me his secret weapon. He said it with pride. What I did not know, what I had no reason to know, was that my father had changed his will 18 months before the stroke. My aunt told me. Not directly, not with any drama. She mentioned it at Thanksgiving, offhand, the way people mention things they assume everyone already knows. She said my father had spoken to his attorney about restructuring the company ownership so that it would transfer to both me and my brother equally upon his death, and that my brother had not taken the news well. I filed that information away. I noted it, the way I note everything. I did not ask questions yet. After the stroke, my father came home with a list of medications and a directive from his cardiologist to reduce stress. My mother became his full-time caretaker. My brother began coming to the house every day, sometimes twice. He started sitting in on my father's calls with the company attorney. He started CCing himself on emails he had no prior involvement with. I watched all of this from a careful distance and told myself it was grief management, that my brother was scared of losing our father and was handling it by taking control of things around him. Then my father asked me to come in and review the company's financial statements. He didn't trust the numbers, he said. Things weren't adding up. He was tired and his vision wasn't what it used to be, and he trusted me more than anyone to tell him the truth. He said this quietly, when my brother was not in the house. He said it like a secret. I took the files home that night. Daniel was in the living room watching television, and I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and started reading. And by midnight I had found the first anomaly. It was small. A vendor payment. Slightly above the threshold that would trigger a second approval signature. Repeated 6 times over 8 months. Each one just under the limit. Each one routing to a holding company I didn't recognize. I wrote down the name of the holding company, and I did not sleep that night. In the morning I ran the name. The holding company had been registered 14 months ago in the state of Delaware. The registered agent was a law firm I didn't know. The beneficial owner was listed as a family trust. The trustee's signature on the formation documents was my father's name, except my father hadn't signed it. I have looked at thousands of signatures in my career. I know what forgery looks like. I know the pressure points, the hesitation marks, the places where someone copying a signature slows down slightly because they are thinking instead of writing. My father had a distinctive looping capital R that nobody ever got right on the first try. The signature on those formation documents had a straight capital R. Clean, careful, and wrong. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for 20 minutes before I went inside. I called Daniel. I told him I had found something in my father's company files and I needed a few days to understand what I was looking at before I said anything to anyone. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He said, "You don't sound fine." I said, "I will be. I just need to be sure first." He said, "Okay, I'm here. Whatever you find." That is why I called him, because I knew he would say exactly that. Over the next 11 days, I went through every financial record I could access. I used the login credentials my father had given me, which were the owner-level credentials, which meant I could see everything. The vendor payments were only the beginning. There were also 2 insurance policy changes my father removed from one. My brother added as sole beneficiary on another. There was a draft amendment to the company's shareholder agreement that had never been finalized, but had been saved to the company's shared drive under a folder labeled Final Docs. The amendment would have transferred my father's shares to my brother upon incapacitation, not death, not equally, not to both of us. And there was an email, sent from my brother's work account to the family attorney, 8 months earlier, with the subject line Dad's wishes, company succession. The email said my father had verbally confirmed he wanted the company to go to my brother exclusively, and that the will amendment they had discussed should reflect this, and that the prior conversation with my father's estate planning attorney, the one my aunt had mentioned at Thanksgiving, should be considered superseded. My father had not sent that email. My father had not authorized that email. My father did not know that email existed. I printed everything. I drove to a FedEx store 3 towns over and made copies of everything. I put one set in a locked drawer at my office, and one set in a fireproof box in Daniel's car, which I asked him to park at his sister's house without explaining why. He did it without asking me to explain. I told him, "Give me 3 more days, then I'll tell you everything." He said okay. On the 14th day, my mother called and asked me to come to the house for dinner. She said my father was having a good week and wanted to see me. She said my brother would be there. She said it would be nice to have the whole family together. I went. Dinner was quiet in the way that dinners are quiet when everyone is waiting for something. My father looked tired but present. He asked about my work. He asked about Daniel. He said he missed having us over more often. My brother sat at the other end of the table and barely spoke and did not look at me directly for the first 40 minutes. After dinner, my father went to rest. My mother started washing dishes. My brother asked me to come to the study. He closed the door behind us. He said, "I know you've been in the company files." I said, "Dad asked me to review the financials." He said, "You were never supposed to be part of this company. Dad built it for me." He said it evenly, like a fact, like he had rehearsed it. "Sign the transfer papers, or I will make sure you regret every single day you didn't." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the 14 days I had spent at my kitchen table. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about the insurance policy with my father removed. I thought about Daniel's car parked at his sister's house with a fireproof box in the trunk. I said, "What transfer papers?" He opened the desk drawer and took out a document. 4 pages, already tabbed for signatures. A full transfer of my interest in the company, an interest I hadn't even known was mine until 11 days ago, for a sum of money that was roughly 8% of what the company was actually worth. My name was typed at the top. The date was today's date. I picked it up. I read it. I set it back down on the desk. I said, "I need to think about this." He said, "You have until Friday." I said, "Okay." And I left the study and said goodnight to my mother and drove home and called Daniel from the driveway and told him everything. He was silent for a very long time. Then he said, "Are you safe?" I said yes. I said I was home. I was fine. I had copies of everything. He said, "I'm coming home right now." He had been at a work dinner 40 minutes away. He was home in 35. We sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning going through everything I had printed. Daniel is a project manager. He is methodical and calm under pressure and he does not panic. He made a list. He asked me questions. He said, "Who needs to see this first, your father or an attorney?" I said, "An attorney, before my father, because if my father confronts my brother before we have a legal structure around this, my brother will destroy the evidence he controls." Daniel said, "You already know an attorney." I did. I had worked with an attorney named Margaret on 2 separate fraud cases through my firm. She specialized in fiduciary litigation. I had her personal number in my phone. I texted her that night. She called me at 7:30 the next morning. She asked me to bring everything to her office that afternoon. I did. She sat across the desk from me and read through the documents for 90 minutes while I drank bad coffee and waited. When she finished, she looked up and said, "This is a very solid fraud case. The forged trustee's signature alone is a felony. The insurance changes without your father's knowledge compound it significantly." She said, "Has your father been told any of this?" I said, "Not yet. I wanted legal counsel first." She said, "Good. That was exactly right." She leaned back in her chair. "Here is what I want you to do. Go home. Do not respond to your brother about the transfer papers. Do not contact your father yet. I am going to make 2 calls this afternoon. One to a forensic document examiner who can formally certify the signature analysis, and one to the State Attorney General's office, which handles financial elder abuse cases." I said, "Elder abuse?" She said, "Your father is 64, post-stroke, being administered medications, and someone has been using his identity to establish financial instruments without his knowledge or consent. That qualifies." I drove home feeling like I was walking on the surface of something that hadn't fully solidified yet. I called Daniel from the car. I told him what Margaret had said. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Whatever happens next, we do it together." I said, "I know." My brother called me Thursday evening. He said, "Tomorrow is Friday." I said, "I know. I haven't made a decision yet." He said I was making a mistake. He said our parents would be devastated if I caused problems for the family. He said he was the one who had been there, who had put in the years, who had earned what was his. I said, "I understand your perspective," and then I said I had to go, because dinner was ready. I had started recording every call from him 3 days earlier. I had also started carrying a small digital recorder in my jacket pocket, which is not illegal in my state for one-party consent situations, which Margaret had confirmed. I had recorded the conversation in my father's study the night of the dinner. My brother had been very clear on that recording. Friday came. I didn't call him. He called me at noon. He called me again at 3. The third call came at 7 in the evening and I didn't answer. At 9:45 that night, my mother called. She said my father had had a difficult day and that my brother was very upset and that this wasn't like me, to be cold and difficult. She said our family didn't handle things this way. She said whatever disagreement I had with my brother, I should come to the house Saturday morning and resolve it. I said, "I'll come Saturday morning." I called Margaret immediately after and told her. She said, "Good. That works well. I've been waiting to hear back from the AG's office, but regardless, I want you to record that conversation, and I want you to do something for me before you go. I want you to write out, in your own words, a timeline of every conversation and every document you've reviewed, with dates and timestamps. Send it to me tonight." I sat up until midnight writing the timeline. Daniel sat next to me the whole time. Saturday morning I drove to my parents' house alone. Daniel knew where I was going. He knew who to call if he didn't hear from me within 3 hours. We had agreed on that specifically. My brother was already there when I arrived. So was his wife, which surprised me. She sat in the corner of the living room with her hands folded in her lap and she looked at me when I came in with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Not hostile, not warm, careful. My mother offered me coffee. I took it. My brother started talking almost immediately. He said he had spoken to the family attorney. He said the attorney had confirmed that the company transfer was in everyone's best interest. He said our father had expressed, on multiple occasions, his intention for my brother to take over the business, and that the paperwork I had been asked to sign simply formalized what the family already knew to be true. I said, "Dad told you he wanted to exclude me from the company?" My brother said, "He made his wishes clear over many years." I said, "Did he make them clear before or after someone used his name to set up a holding company in Delaware?" The room went very quiet. My brother's expression didn't collapse exactly. It shifted. A tightening around the jaw. A stillness that wasn't comfortable. My mother set down her coffee cup. I said, "I've spent 3 weeks reviewing the company's financial records, which I was authorized to access by Dad. I found vendor payments routing to a holding company formed using a forged version of Dad's signature as trustee. I found insurance policy changes that removed Dad as a beneficiary without his knowledge. I found an email sent to the family attorney misrepresenting Dad's wishes. I looked at my brother. I have the original documents, certified copies, a forensic examiner's analysis of the signature, and an attorney." My brother said, "You don't know what you're talking about." I said, "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I do this for a living." It was my brother's wife who spoke next. She said, quietly, to no one in particular, "I told him not to do it." My brother turned to look at her. She did not look at him. She was looking at the floor, and her hands had tightened in her lap, and she said again, "I told him not to." My brother said her name, sharp, warning. She looked up at me and she said, "I didn't know about the holding company until after it was done. He told me it was just restructuring. But I knew about the email to the attorney. I knew that wasn't right." Her voice was steady but her hands were still tight. "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." My brother stood up. He said things I will not repeat here, directed at his wife and then at me. He said I was destroying the family. He said I was doing this out of jealousy. He said that if I went forward with whatever I was planning, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I said, "I'm not going forward with anything. It's already done." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Daniel. I stepped to the side of the room and read his message. It said, "Margaret says the AG investigator confirmed. They have a warrant. She says leave the house now if you can, or stay out of the main rooms." I looked up and I said, "Mom, I think you should sit down." 3 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. My mother opened it to 2 men in dark jackets, who identified themselves as investigators from the State Attorney General's office. They asked if my brother was present. They asked my brother to remain seated. One of them read him a statement about an active investigation into allegations of financial elder abuse and securities fraud. My father appeared in the hallway, having heard voices. He was in his pajamas and he looked confused. And then he looked at my brother's face, and his expression changed into something that was not confusion at all. He had known something was wrong. He just hadn't known how wrong. My mother started crying. She looked at my brother and she looked at my father and she said nothing. She had nothing to say that could travel the distance between what she had suspected and what was happening in her living room right now. I stayed until my father was seated, and the initial interview process had begun. The investigators were professional and measured. They were not theatrical. They asked my father specific questions and he answered them in a voice that got steadier as the conversation continued, as though the act of telling the truth was itself restorative. Before I left, my father reached out and caught my arm. He looked up at me from the couch, and he said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know, Dad. I know you didn't." He said, "How did you find it?" I said, "You asked me to look." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have asked you sooner." I did not say, "Yes, you should have." I said, "We found it in time. That's what matters." I drove home. Daniel was standing on the front steps when I pulled up, which meant he had been watching for my car. He came down the walkway and held the door open for me, and then he held me in the driveway for a long time without saying anything, which was exactly what I needed. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple. They rarely are. The investigation moved forward. The forensic examiner's report confirmed the signature forgery. The state's financial records for the holding company were subpoenaed. The family attorney, faced with a conflict of interest and a bar complaint, withdrew from representation and provided his own documentation to the investigators. My brother retained a criminal defense attorney. My brother's wife cooperated fully with the investigation. She sat down with the state's attorneys for 6 hours and told them everything she knew, which was more than she had let on in that living room. She and my brother had separated by then. She sent me one text message, just one, that said, "I know it doesn't change anything, but I am genuinely sorry." I read it twice, and then I put my phone down, and I sat with it for a while before I replied. I said, "It helps more than you think." Because it did. My father spent a month working with a separate estate attorney to reconstruct his actual intentions, documented clearly, with independent verification of his capacity, and without any involvement from anyone who had a direct financial interest in the outcome. He called me after the first meeting and said the attorney had been thorough and kind and that he felt, for the first time in 2 years, like his own affairs were actually his. He also said, "I kept meaning to talk to you about what I was leaving. I thought there was more time." I said, "There is still time, Dad." He said, "I know. He stopped. Then he said, "I should have talked to you the way I talked to your brother. I should have made it clear to you what I was building, and who I was building it for." I said, "You did. Every time you called me your secret weapon." He laughed a little. It was the first time I had heard him laugh since the stroke. My mother and I are in a different place. She did not know about the forgery. I believe that, but she knew my brother was pushing hard to secure his position in the company, and she had let it happen without asking too many questions, because she trusted him in the way she had always trusted him, with the specific and somewhat willful faith of a mother who has already decided who her children are. That kind of trust is not malicious. It is, in some ways, harder to be angry at than malice. We talk on the phone twice a week. We do not talk about my brother. We talk about my father's health and her garden and what Daniel and I are doing on the weekends. We are building something smaller than what we had, but more honest, and I think that is probably what we always had, just without the honesty. The case is still ongoing. I have been told that a resolution is likely within the next few months. My attorney says the evidence is unambiguous. My brother's attorney is negotiating. Those things take the time they take. What I can tell you is this. The Sunday after everything happened, Daniel and I drove to a farmer's market an hour from our house that we had been meaning to visit for 2 years and never gotten around to. We bought tomatoes and fresh bread and a jar of local honey. We sat at a picnic table outside and ate sandwiches and drank bad coffee from a paper cup, and the weather was ordinary and perfect, the kind of morning that doesn't ask anything from you. I thought about my father asking me to look at those files. I thought about how he said it quietly, when my brother wasn't in the house. I think he knew. Not the details. Not the forgery or the holding company or the insurance changes, but he knew something had shifted. That something in the foundation of the thing he had built had developed a crack he couldn't locate on his own. And he knew that of all the people around him, I was the one trained to find what was hidden. There is a version of this story where I signed the transfer papers on Friday, where I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That family peace was worth more than my share of something I had never worked directly to build. That version ends with my father's estate transferred under fraudulent documents, my brother controlling everything, and my father spending his last years not knowing that the person he trusted most with his legacy had used that trust like a tool. I did not sign the papers. The cost of not signing was high. My relationship with my brother is gone in any form I would recognize. My mother and I will never fully close the distance the last several months created. Holidays will be different now. Quieter, more careful. But my father knows the truth about what was done in his name. His company is protected. His estate reflects his actual wishes. And on that Sunday morning at a farmer's market with bad coffee and good bread and my husband next to me in the ordinary autumn light, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. It was something close to peace. And it cost every single thing it cost. And I would pay it again without hesitation.